Hello, brothers, sisters, and friends. Welcome to You Are the Current Resident podcast. This is the official podcast of the National Association of Letter Carriers, the union that represents 280,000 active and retired city letter carriers employed by the United States Postal Service. I'm Ed Morgan, and not sitting next to me, we're actually on Zoom today, I almost forgot, is our national president, Brian Renfroe. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Eddie, I'm doing great. Just got back from one of the more exciting things we get to do every couple of years. That's the National Rap Session, which I know we'll talk about here in just a minute. So it's fun to be with you once again. And we're recording this on Thanksgiving week. So looking forward to the holiday.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. So let's get into the rap session. We had it down in New Orleans. I think it went terrific. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with you. But just to start, I want to express my appreciation and on behalf of the executive council and all the staff here at headquarters, our appreciation to our branch and state leaders that came down to New Orleans and participated in the rap session. And they they got a lot of information, and it was a really busy few days. So first, want to be sure to recognize and appreciate them because, ultimately that's the purpose of it. Our Constitution requires it, and it's something that we love to take advantage of, that opportunity to share so they can go back and in their branches or state associations share the information with their members. But no, it went really, really well. New Orleans, is anybody that's listening that's been there, I think will agree, is a great place. I'll admit I'm kind of biased because it's almost home for me. I'm from right up the road from New Orleans in South Mississippi, but no, it was phenomenal. So we started off on Friday and with registration and a little welcome reception, and then spent all day Saturday with workshops that each of the resident officers participated in, and a lot of our headquarters staff shared all kinds of information about a lot of different things that are going on, with our union, with our jobs. And, the folks that were there that attended, our leadership took full advantage of that. Each of those classes was full. So that was a great opportunity to share a lot of information. And then on Sunday, we had the rap session itself starting early in the morning and got done a little before noon. And, I had the chance to share, dig into several different topics, collective bargaining, what we're doing, as we've talked about a lot on the podcast, with trying to fight back against the crime and the violence against our members that we're seeing, unfortunately, continue to increase around the country. We talked about what we're doing in a big picture to continue our efforts to improve representation across the board. We talked a lot about a lot of the current legislative and political issues, and then got into some exciting new stuff that we're excited about rolling out as we move into 2024 and beyond. And then, as the name would indicate, we technically, constitutionally, they call this a national conference, but we've kind of historically called it a rap session because we set aside a significant amount of time, as we did yesterday morning, to hear from the leadership that's in attendance. They, asked me a lot of different questions and brought up a number of different issues and shared experiences, and that's always valuable, certainly for everyone that's in attendance. But speaking from a personal perspective, it's also valuable to me to hear the feedback from the leadership of our branches and state associations. So went really, really well. I want to compliment our headquarters staff and all our resident officers here that did a fantastic job preparing for every aspect of the event. When you attend things like this, which, obviously I and Ed, you have, and a lot of our listeners have in the past, be it a convention or rap session, it's usually fairly straightforward and seamless. Everything's all ready to go when we get there, and we go to the workshops and the sessions, and things tend to run pretty smoothly. But there's a lot of work that has to be done in preparation to ensure that we create the best experience we can for all our people that attend. And all those folks that I mentioned did a fantastic job of that. I really couldn't have gone any better. And, we were able to handle a lot of the issues and discuss things that are really, really important to our members right now. And at the same time, embrace, a lot of kind of local culture there in New Orleans. With our branch 124, those guys did a great job of hosting us, and a branch that they're from my region. I know them well. And just like everything else in New Orleans, they have a great spirit about them. And I think that kind of permeated through the entire event. So, we covered, as I said, a lot of different information. And for those listening that maybe were not attendees at the wrap session and you maybe haven't had a branch meeting since the wrap session took place, one, I hope that if your leadership attended, that you will hear from them a lot of the information that we provided and the things that we discussed. But we also have some plans here in the near future, in the next issue of the Postal Record, in the Bulletin, and several of our other publications. It will have a lot of coverage of what took place there. So, even if you're a listener and you did not attend, or maybe you haven't heard directly from your leadership that did attend as of yet, you will see some coverage in the magazine, and where we'll get into a lot of detail about, a number of the things that we talked about, because it's important. It's important for all of our members to be on the same page and have an understanding of the, challenges we face and the way we're fighting those things and working to improve a number of different areas in which we are responsible for providing representation that ultimately will benefit our members.
That's a great point. If you are a member and you haven't been to a union meeting in a while, get to your next union meeting, because it's going to be about contract negotiations and things that you can only hear letter carrier to letter carrier, member to member. Next week, we're going to actually have a little mini wrap session here on the podcast. We're going to kind of go over what's going on at the wrap session. I think that'll be a pretty good time. What do you think, Ron?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. I'll give you credit. That was your idea. But I'm excited about it. So we'll cover, as I mentioned, obviously we talked about a lot of stuff to do with collective bargaining and crime and, legislative, political stuff and a number of different issues. But I'm particularly excited to dig in next week into some of the new things that we're in the process of working on that are all designed to benefit our members. So that episode next week will be a lot of fun for us to do, and hopefully for the listeners, it'll be an opportunity for them to get an experience that in some ways is similar to those that attended the wrap session back in New Orleans. But Ed, you make a very good point. If you're out there as a member and you haven't been to your local union meeting in a while, the next one will definitely be a good one to attend, because I can tell you we got very in depth on a number of different topics, and I'm sure your leadership will be eager to share that with the members of your branch. So it's always a good idea to attend your meetings. That's the best way to keep up with what's happening with our jobs and representation and that kind of stuff. But coming off of an event like this, there should be a even greater amount of information and discussion about the stuff that's important to us than maybe there normally would be. So get out to your meetings.
I just want to piggyback on two things you said earlier. One, the leadership that was in attendance, I would call them professional. I was in a presentation later in the day on Saturday, and the room was packed and quiet. People were taking notes. Just really good to see, just the way we do it. We're out on the route being professional, and being in the union halls being professional. It was the same thing here in New Orleans. And the second point is the cuisine in New Orleans is terrific. And I was thinking about renting a room over Mother's Restaurant and just living there for the rest of my life.
Yeah, you're right. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I have, over the last decade plus, been fortunate to be a resident officer here at NALC headquarters. And over that time, I've had the opportunity to travel all over the country. And even though I'm a little biased, it's home. I do think that it's still the best food city that I've ever been to. And I would imagine there's a lot of branch and state leaders that after the last few days would agree. But Ed, I could not agree with you more. I'm always impressed by whether it's the delegates at a national convention or the folks from the branches that attend our regional trainings, that I go around the country and get to spend some time with the members and address them and update them. I'm always impressed by the professionalism, and people are there. And, while they're there, of course, they enjoy themselves, and it's always fun to be in a different city. But they take the work and the responsibility that they have attending those events very seriously. And that's evident when we look out and see leadership that may have been in a leadership position for some time. And we see that same level, if not, frankly, even, a continually increasing level of professionalism from the exciting number of young leaders that we see every year when we have these types of national events. So those folks folks at the branch level are really what makes our union strong, and they take their responsibilities when they attend events like this very seriously. And professionalism is a really good word to describe one of the really glaring characteristics that we see from our people. Whenever they're in an environment to learn or give feedback or participate in whatever capacity with anything to do with our union. So I could not agree with that statement anymore.
Switching topics now, just talking about our Enough is Enough rallies. I know we have another one coming up at the end of the month. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, as we talked about yesterday, and you and I have talked about a number of times on this podcast, we keep working on what, aside from collective bargaining, is right there is our number one priority, and that's the safety of our members, and in particular, safety as it relates to trying to slow down, quell, reverse, and hopefully one day eliminate these violent attacks we've seen on our members. So we've done a number of these rallies around the country at this point, and the idea is to raise public awareness, and we've seen some positive impacts there too. We've seen, not just the folks that we serve every day, them being aware of this so they can maybe keep an eye out for us. But we've also seen it permeate into other areas that we need to make some improvements in order to push back on this crime, such as prosecutions. We've seen an increase in the number of prosecutions. We've seen the United States Attorney's offices in a number of locations begin to kind of move these type of issues up their priority list. So that's a positive impact. But yeah, we're excited. Next week, on November the 30th, we are going to have a rally in Phoenix, Arizona. So our brothers and sisters there at Branch 576, I'm sure a couple of the surrounding branches there will also have some folks in attendance, and we will continue our efforts to educate people and raise awareness and send that really strong message of enough is enough. And, look, we've had it with our members being targets out on the street, and we're going to continue doing everything we can to push back. And that'll be the next step in our efforts when it comes to kind of public awareness and public engagement. So for all our brothers and sisters there in Arizona, look forward to seeing you there next week. We've got a couple more planned here in the reasonably near future. And I'm sure as we talk next week on our, podcast version of the RAF session, I'm sure we'll get into a little more detail about some of the other things that we're working on as it relates to pushing back on this crime.
And this is our Thanksgiving weekend episode. So we were going to talk about Thanksgiving and community. We are going to have a special guest on, Pat Byrne. Do you want to talk about Pat for a second?
Yeah, this is something that I am so excited about. I'm so excited for our listeners to be able to hear from Pat. So Pat is a retired letter carrier. Pat's a long time NALC activist. He's from Massachusetts, the Boston area, from Branch 7 in Lynn, Massachusetts. And I've known Pat for a long time, going back years before I was here at NALC headquarters. He's a special individual. And I know on a recent episode, we had Mike Shea on, and we were talking about the postal record. And one of the things that we talked about is the interesting stories, be it hobbies or remarkable things, acts of heroism that our members do. And one thing that always holds true is that our members are special people, and they often go to great lengths to help others. And we thought for Thanksgiving, a holiday that, is really about giving thanks and appreciation, that it would be a good idea to have something maybe a little different than we normally do on the podcast, and, just highlight an example of our members doing really remarkable things. And Pat is, for a long time now, nearly 20 years, has done a lot of remarkable things in terms of helping people that are facing all kinds of different challenges. And I don't want to, spoil the interview. It's much better for you to hear it from Pat than from me, but he's a great person and someone that has really spent his adult life dedicated to serving NALC members. And he's also spent a significant portion of his adult life, in addition to serving NALC members, he spent his time serving his community and really helping those that need it most. So he's a special person. The story that you'll hear is in my opinion, very moving. It's pretty amazing what our members do beyond just what we do, delivering the mail and serving our customers. And Pat's a great example of that. And he's a really entertaining guy. And he also happens to have a great voice for podcasts. So I think everybody will enjoy listening to it. So, Eddie, I guess before we move on to talk to Pat, speaking of Thanksgiving, I just want to express my appreciation to our members for everything you do every day to not just serve your customers and your communities, but what you do for our union. You know, our union is very blessed. When we look around at other unions, I'm in my position as president, I have the opportunity through the AFL-CIO and even a few other activities that I do fairly regularly. I'm exposed to a lot of other unions, and I have a lot of close friends and brothers and sisters that have various responsibilities with other unions. And one thing that is no secret up here in Washington, D.C., as it relates to unions and the labor movement, is that NALC has the most active membership of any union. We would argue that, and I believe we would be correct, regardless of what area of activism we're talking about. You know, historically for us, going back in the, I guess we're approaching 135-year history of our union, it really is that activism of our members and the spirit of solidarity that empowers us to be successful. I've written in the Postal Record a few times about this concept of empowered solidarity and the level of activism among our members and the fact that they approach everything, you know, even from our jobs to those that are involved in work with the union representing letter carriers in whatever area they choose to do so. That level of activism creates the empowered solidarity that has made us successful for a long, long time, and I believe will continue to make us successful long into the future. So as we're in this holiday season of Thanksgiving, I wanted to just express my sincerest thanks to the members of our union for what they do every single day to serve our customers, certainly, but also what they do to serve our union and continue to strengthen our union, which will be a benefit to our brothers and sisters in the present. And we also have a long tradition will continue to benefit our members far into the future. So thank you all and happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Hey, here's my interview with NALC Branch 7 member, Pat Byrne. Hey, Pat, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I look forward to this.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's number one, really good to talk to you again. It's been a little while and happy to have known you for a long time. And I know our listeners should be very interested in hearing you tell your story. I have personally always found it very inspirational, and I'm sure they will do the same. But before we get into some of that, why don't you first talk to us a little bit, maybe fill our listeners in on your background professionally. I mean, were a letter carrier for a long time and did a lot of work, you know, for the NALC in different capacities. And so from wherever you want to start, leading up to what you're currently doing, just kind of fill us in on what you've done over the course of your career professionally.
Well, I think like quite a few letter carriers across the nation, you know, I came out of the Army in 1974 and took a starter job with the Postal Service, married my starter girlfriend, bought a starter home, and 52 years later, we're in the same home with the same girlfriend, and I'm still involved with the NALC. So, as I say, I think a lot of us follow that same path. We thought things were one way and realized quickly that we were in a pretty good situation. The NALC allowed me an opportunity very quickly to understand the need for representation and service, both to my members and to my community. Became a steward as a PTF and moved up through the different offices in the branch and became branch president. And that was a starter job too that I kept for 22 years. I had a couple of terms as state president, which was very educational. It was shortly after the NALC redefined the state chairs to be legislative and political. So the training and contract type training was off the board. And so I got to see exactly how politics and legislation affect our daily lives. And concurrently with that, I worked as an arbitration advocate for over 33 years. Probably had been assigned thousands of cases. I'm not sure that we arbitrated nearly that many, but I certainly settled quite a few. In the last couple of years, I just recently retired as a arbitrator on the letter carrier postal service panel. I had just found that after 2 years of doing that, I really had my fill of dispute resolution in any form. Well, basically, I had my fill of dispute. I retired from the postal service in 2006, and after 3 days of wishing my wife a good day at work while I stayed in the home, I realized that wasn't tenable. So I searched in my local community, and I found a job as a advocate for the homeless. I worked in that position for 15 years, representing vulnerable folks in the community, which were drug addicts and mentally ill folks, sex workers, and there was an awful lot of overlap in those categories as well. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was tasked by our mayor to lead the coalition task force on the vulnerable population, which also included the elderly at that time. And I had a 2-year stint of that as well. So I think that's pretty much it, chronological, what I've been up to. In that role, I think one of the biggest things that we learn is that, cures are very difficult to find. Identifying problems is pretty easy for everybody. We're all expert problem finders. Problem solving is a little bit more difficult. And I took it on a very basic approach. I remember people's names, and if I saw somebody in the morning, I might wish them a good morning, use their name and touch them on the shoulder, and it might be the only time in the course of the day that they were treated with any decency. And that resonated with me. I saw it. I saw an immediate connection with folks, and I felt very rewarded by it.
Yeah, that's really one of the things I recall from, past conversations that you and I have had, that despite you dedicating really a large portion of your life to, serving those that are in need, that, frankly, were often in, very difficult situations, complicated situations health-wise. And I know you have, over that period of time, educated yourself in a lot of ways on how to help those people with things like diabetes and maybe even some other health conditions. You've always pointed out that, one of the biggest benefits that you can give another human being is often the most simple thing you can think of, which is just simply being nice to people. And, a kind word that, folks that are, really having a difficult time, something very small like that can mean a lot to them.
Well, I think we could agree that it's really not that small. One of the main planks of the NALC is that we demand our membership be treated with dignity and respect. So to apply that on a universal basis, I think, makes perfect sense. And it has a great impact. It really does. It's even I'm sure when we look at the variety of offices where letter carriers serve, where there is an office that treat people with dignity and respect and kindness, that's a lot better feeling than the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's really, it's interesting to me that, you for a long time, as you mentioned, served in lots of different roles. You and I actually met years ago through arbitration. I think we were in Texas, as I recall. And then, you went on to become an arbitrator. And we are, very much appreciative, as I know the many, many members over the years that you had the opportunity to represent are also appreciative of everything, that you did as far as representation. And, as you mentioned, dispute resolution is kind of at the core of what we do. And, that's something that you did well for a long time. And for the purposes of this conversation, we really I think the story of what you've done over the years, even beyond that, as we often hear, we actually talked on a recent episode of this podcast. We were talking about the history of the postal record and some of the, stories that we've done that were, just remarkable things that NALC members have done, even outside of our work as letter carriers, our work as, union representatives. And I think yours is very unique in that regard. You mentioned that after you retired from the Postal Service that you began doing a lot of stuff helping out people in the different communities that were having difficulty, the homeless, those, suffering from addiction. And then, later on in your life that you had a personal tragedy that, really hit home. So I wanted to be sure and give you the opportunity to talk about your son, Jamie, and what took place there and how that I think even probably further motivated you to continue the work that you had been doing for a number of years before.
Well, certainly. My son, Jamie, I have a son and a daughter. My son, Jamie, was our firstborn. Brilliant child, beautiful man. He had a master's degree in computer science from Boston University and was very successful financially in his field. And through college, he had picked up a habit he was using drugs intravenously. And through his adult life, he fought that battle. He had periods of sobriety of over 5 years. When he was 40 years old, he was contacted by an old friend, a family friend. She was in dire straits, and he had asked him. She was unable to even leave her house. She had so many folks after her for non-payment of her drug use bills, and she had asked him to procure drugs for her. He did so Saturday afternoon. She was to pick them up on Saturday evening, and he could not resist the urge to try them. And he overdosed and perished. Coincidentally to that was January of 2014. And in the Northeast here, we were hit with fentanyl wave right towards the end of 2013. So he was one of the first casualties in our community of the fentanyl. As tragic as it is, and you pointed out, it's the ultimate loss. I mean, it's something that no parent wants to even consider, let alone experience. However, there's a choice in life when you're hit with something like that. Either you go on or you become the victim yourself. And, I wasn't going to let that happen. I owed it to my grandchildren and my daughter and my wife, and to myself to continue to move forward and to help. And what it did for me was it gave me a different perspective, a different sensitivity. I started to become aware of not just the person suffering on the street, but the impact it had on their families, and the fact that with very little input, I could make a difference. And I took that opportunity, and I found that it gave me an immense sense of personal wealth, not in a monetary fashion, but of a worthiness fashion. I felt that I would walk into a room and could clearly be identified as the wealthiest person in the room, not defined by loss, but by being defined by having an ability to help others. And the reward of doing that was something I did not anticipate. I was completely blindsided. I found it to be so worthwhile, and I benefited greatly from it.
Yeah, it's Pat, it's such an inspirational. I mean, I've heard you and had this conversation with you in years past, and it still is, and I'm sure for our listeners, I think very inspirational because, as you said, when faced with adversity and in this again terribly tragic situation, you really face the ultimate adversity. It's hard to imagine a circumstance more difficult than losing a child. That we all are really faced with a choice, and the not an easy choice, but the choice you made there is I think number one, admirable. And from a personal perspective, as someone who has battled addiction to alcohol, thankfully by, the grace of God and with the help of a lot of people, I mean, I'm doing great and have, an extended period of sobriety now, but the recognition of, what you experienced firsthand, the impact that it has on the individual, of course, but also on those around them, their family, and that those people who are often those that are kind of the ones that people that battle these type of illnesses turn to. Those people need support too, and you certainly can empathize at a level that most of us cannot imagine. So I'm sure that definitely the perspective that you gain there, but being able to assist those and, really have the deepest understanding of what they're dealing with, which kind of leads to my next question is what, do you have advice for those, for maybe members or listeners of this podcast who have family members or others close to them that are dealing with, be it addiction to drugs or alcohol or mental illness or, whatever the case may be? What type of advice would you offer to them in terms of what they could do, or, whether to help themselves or to help others?
Well, I sure wish there was a fortune cookie answer for that one.
Me too.
My the greatest advice I could give is to understand that the person who's suffering, is in fact suffering, and probably not receptive to a whole lot of advice. You can yell, you can cajole, you can try kidding, but you can't hit somebody in the head with a hammer and expect them to have your viewpoint. It's just not the way life works. Part of it, and part that, was critical to me, and I understood it after my loss, was that, stay alive. Like, one piece of advice: stay alive. You don't know what tomorrow might be better. You don't know what will give somebody a breakthrough, Brian, and what makes somebody finally see the light. As somebody that I was so proud when you made public your struggles, because that you can look at that two ways, right? We can sense a weakness because, oh my goodness, you were fighting a battle that you weren't winning, or we can sense leadership, true leadership, where you exposed yourself, you were raw, and took where the chips may fall. And I think that that's the approach that I take with people, as far as advice goes, to just say, look, be honest with your family members, and just be there for somebody. Check in on them. It's not a matter of approval or disapproval or changing their behaviors, because that's impossible. You can't change people's behavior. You can certainly make recommendations and exert influence, but you're not going to change anything unless that person's ready. I think that an advice I would give to friends and family members, coworkers: if you think somebody's in trouble, don't be afraid to approach them. And if they rebuff you, don't be afraid to just, you know what, you don't want to talk to me, that's fine, but I'm still here for you. When you are ready, I'm here for you. Don't give up. I guess that's the key piece of advice: is don't ever give up. As a parent who lived with his child's addiction for 20 years on and off, but it was a real problem. I went through an awful lot of emotional turmoil, anger, sadness. I felt victimized. I felt sorry for myself. I felt sorry for my son. I was mad at my son. I didn't like my son. And truth be told, none of that was really true. The love level never changed. Sometimes we're frustrated at our inability to affect change. So what I would say is, don't let that bother you if your message isn't heard by the person that you care about. Just make sure you're there for them for when they do turn it around. And that really is the only advice I could give at this point.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Just simply being there, as you mentioned, is very important. And then I think for addicts in recovery, acceptance is a huge sort of concept that you have to learn to accept, for lack of a better word. But I think also, when you have someone close to you, as you mentioned, that's struggling, you also have to be willing to, accept that you cannot make them do anything. What you can do, however, is as you said, just be there. You should certainly not be afraid to approach them, and but I think the important thing is that you're there. So at whatever point that individual, and this is really different with everyone, that individual gets to a place for whatever reason, and is receptive to or willing to do what they need to do to get help, it's important that you're there to help them. And again, I can speak from personal experience, and thankfully, both family, friends, and lots of other people that there's never a time when someone needs support more than when they're struggling with anything. But I think that's particularly true of addicts. So really appreciate that. One of the things that we do every year here at NALC that is, to me, one of the most gratifying and things that we do is on a yearly basis, we give away awards and recognize letter carriers that are heroes of the year. And we do a variety of awards. Some of them are geographic, different parts of the country. You utilize judges to choose heroes. And then we also give away other awards that are specific to certain areas. And, while we're limited in the number of awards that we can give away every year, the fact is that thousands of letter carriers every year do heroic things that go way beyond delivering the mail. And that continues, not just while our folks are active working for the Postal Service, but one of the really unique and strong things about our union is the strength of our retired members and the work they continue to do. But back in 2016, you were the recipient of our Hero of the Year Award for Education, due to a lot of the things you've talked about already, that at that point, I guess for about a decade, you had been involved in assisting a lot of different people that were in need there in your community. So first, congratulations again, even though it's 7 years later. I'll never forget, you and I having the opportunity to go to Capitol Hill and sit down with your senators and that type of stuff. But I'm curious any reflections you have on that experience. And I think, as we often see, I'm sure you had pretty vivid memories of the other heroes that were honored that year. But I just want to give you the opportunity to share any memories or reflections or takeaways that you had from that experience.
That was one of the most intense experiences I've had in my life, not related directly to children, family, professionally, for sure. It was such a tremendous award. And when I first found out, I was in a sense of disbelief, because I didn't think that, I was getting paid. I was doing a job. I didn't think there was anything heroic about it. However, when I connected with the fellow recipients and their extended group, the folks that traveled with them, who knew them intimately, as it were, a realization came across me that, in fact, what we all had accomplished was special together. Those nights that we spent together talking, it was at a level that I never anticipated and I've never experienced before. To see the good in people, how good people are and how instinctive. And when I listened to each of their stories, we all had the same response of, well, it was no big deal. A lot of people have done a lot better things than we have. But in truth, there was just such honesty, and everybody shared the joy. Each and every recipient shared the joy that we got out of our efforts. Recognition was great, but the joy was from experiencing with each other where it had brought us. And it was a special place. It was so great to meet the other people. I met branch leaders. I remember Tommy Duglinski from Syracuse was there. He had a branch member, Colleen, who had arranged a parade for a child that was disabled. But just to watch him interact with her and to see the pride and the kindness that each of these folks exhibited towards us, it was just one of the most special moments of my life, certainly the most special moment of any professional part of my life.
I mean, I have taken, a ton of, just gotten a lot of joy and, pride too, from being involved in that every year. But something you mentioned there in the beginning that I can honestly say, in the 12 years I've been here at NALC headquarters and dealt with and experienced, the heroes each year and the several days of leading up to the luncheon and everything that we do with them, there's always one thing in common, and that is that all of them say and genuinely believe that what I did was nothing out of the ordinary. And I think that is so reflective of the way that all of our members, that letter carriers around the country, that do things, every single day to help people, and they feel the same way. It's not, I didn't do anything special, but it is a just a tremendous honor for us to be able to highlight those heroes, and I'll, from a personal standpoint, definitely never forget that year that you were here. All right, that was back in 2016, and since 2016, there's been we had a pandemic, and been a very unique few years. But I know you've remained very involved with a lot of the things we've already talked about. But why don't you maybe talk a little bit about what you've done and continue to do, since 2016? And I'm sure the pandemic caused some, just like everything else in life, caused some changes and added some layers of difficulty to what's already kind of a very rewarding, obviously, but sometimes a difficult space to work in. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you've been up to the last few years?
Well, if you take a look at we'll start with the pandemic. So, it affects people in so many different ways. But let me give you an example of how it affects homeless folks staying in a homeless shelter. From the moment that it was declared an emergency pandemic, or when it reached pandemic level, because of federal and state funding, shelters were required to socially distance. So what we had probably 50 adult males in a very small room, like maybe 20 by 20 on bunks, with just the tiniest aisles between them. Well, all of a sudden we had to socially distance. So which meant that 2/3 of that population were put out on the street. And that was in every shelter across America. So that exacerbated the homeless situation. The major cities now, we take a look at San Francisco and Los Angeles and Boston, Washington, D.C., the encampments, the tent encampments, folks that live unsheltered. They live, they call it rough sleeping. Those folks, are generally dealing with some issue or another, even if it's just a lack of self-esteem. And that is exacerbated by the situation they find themselves in and by the way people look at them. I've tried to work a little bit in education through the community and trying to educate people that these folks are not less than us. They're just going through a tougher time. And again, a pat on the shoulder, a good morning, a smile, that can be of huge value to somebody who's hurting inside, or somebody whose self-esteem, when they look in the mirror and they don't like the person that they see, they don't wake up in the morning and decide to be the biggest burden on society that ever was. They find themselves in those situations, and they have a lot of, I don't have the energy that I used to, where I would, going to camping areas, and bring socks and water and so forth. It's more difficult for me to, handle that terrain now. But as far as, modifying my approach, it's a little bit more giving guidance and leadership. I sit on some committees still. We have a committee that's in our city. Our city's 100,000 people. It's a manufacturing town that doesn't manufacture anymore. So we have a huge amount of social issues in the city. It was always a town of migrant workers, and it continues to be so. Unfortunately, there's no work for these folks now. I work on a committee that involves criminal justice as well as mental health groups. And we try to identify folks who are vulnerable in the community and make a group approach is to try to help them on an individual basis. There is no panacea. There's no magic wand we're going to cure them. Just roll up your sleeves and, try to help one person at a time. And I'm trying to continue that, although I am getting more comfortable with retirement.
Well, it's well deserved, trust me.
Well, thank you, sir.
Pat, look, I really appreciate you taking some time to share what I believe, and I know our listeners will appreciate as very inspirational and look practical in a lot of ways, because from an advice standpoint, some of what you've shared, because so many just the sheer numbers of, those that suffer from, many of the things that you described that you've been involved in helping people with. There's such a large percentage of people, including members of our union, that are impacted, and if not impacted individually themselves, they certainly are impacted to some degree because they have family members or coworkers or others close to them. And I just speaking from a personal standpoint, you've always been one of my favorite people, and I just want to express, on behalf of our members, my appreciation certainly for everything that you did to represent letter carriers and NALC members over the years, but what you also have done and continue to do for your community there. And we've got a program within the union that we are in the early stages of developing to utilize our members and to help other members in some ways, in similar ways to some of the stuff you've done in the past. So, look forward to really talking with you about that a little more in the future. And, while I know you're enjoying your retirement, I don't have any doubt that you'd be willing to offer your experience and expertise in any way we could to make that as successful as we can. So we'll have a little more about that in a future episode. Pat, once again, thanks so much for taking the time, and it's great to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thanks for this opportunity. I look forward to working with you in the future, any endeavor that you choose. I want to wish all of the members and yourselves happy Thanksgiving. And just a quick message to our membership: don't lose sight of how much you have to be thankful for. Sometimes we dwell on the negative a little too much. And despite all the craziness that's going on in this world, take a look around you and be thankful for what we have. Well, thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Pat.
All right, now let's get into our Ask the Mailbag segment. Our first question comes from Chris. He's been a letter carrier for over 19 years, and he's worked in several districts around the country. One thing that's always baffled him is why don't we have a regional cost of living adjustment or locality pay? Some carriers work in districts where the economics don't work out, where in others, they're more flush with money. Why don't we have locality pay?
Interesting question, and a question that comes up fairly often. Part of that, I think, is because in certain areas of the federal government, you do have some form of locality pay or area wage or whatever terminology you want to use. So let me just give you a little history. NALC's bargaining positions, as we've talked about on this show before, are in large part dictated by processes that play out with resolutions at our convention, resolutions that are submitted by branches and state associations, the delegates of the convention that are all elected by their branches and state associations or their delegates by virtue of the NALC Constitution. They consider, debate, and vote on resolutions. Many of those we categorize as national agreement resolutions, and they set official bargaining positions of the NALC. So this particular topic of locality pay or area wage, or again, whatever terminology you want to use, has been the subject of, I wouldn't even venture to guess without doing a lot of research, exactly how many resolutions over the years, but I would say it's in the double digits, and we have a convention every 2 years. So this, going back as far as I can remember attending national conventions in different capacities, it has been a topic of conversation, and either at minimum a topic of conversation, and in most conventions there's been an actual resolution. Now, when a resolution is submitted, the executive council will take a look at that resolution. The executive council will make a recommendation to the delegates and provide the basis for that recommendation. In the last several conventions, the recommendation that the executive council has made on this particular topic, resolutions that were calling for us to negotiate locality pay or area wage, has been a recommendation of disapproval. But the basis of that recommendation of disapproval is that delegates for literally decades at the convention have considered these type of resolutions and have disapproved them, which is the delegation at the national convention that's elected by the members of the NALC have consistently voted these down, therefore dictating that we should continue to negotiate the same wage for letter carriers no matter where they live, unless they receive the territorial cost of living adjustment. So our recommendation has been based on that until such time as there is a change in what the delegates of the convention, that once again are democratically little d elected per our Constitution by the members all around the country to represent the membership at these conventions, until such time as those delegates vote to change direction on our negotiation, we will continue to negotiate as we have previously. That said, I would be very surprised if at our 2024 convention, which is in Boston next August, I'd be very surprised if there was not a resolution submitted on this issue in some form or fashion. There's been different variations over the years. I can promise you that the delegates to that convention will give that resolution full consideration. There will be plenty of discussion, and ultimately they will vote. And, the vote of the delegates and what they decide to do with this, I call it hypothetical, but I'm almost sure there will be a resolution there. Whatever the delegation at that convention chooses to do with that resolution is the direction that we will go bargain. So if at any point in time the delegation at a convention passes a resolution and adopts a national agreement resolution to set an official bargaining position of NALC to go negotiate a locality pay, then we will absolutely seek to negotiate that. It's just that over the years, and at this point it's 30, 40 years, there have been, I wouldn't even venture to guess how many resolutions, calling for us to negotiate this, and every one of them has been voted down. And that, in my mind, and I think the minds of most members and most members of the Executive Council for sure, is a pretty strong message and mandate to continue to negotiate the same wage for all letter carriers all over the country. Again, until that changes, then we will continue to do that. But there is a democratic process in place. That's why every member has the opportunity to participate in the resolution making process at the branch level. If your branch adopts that resolution, it can be submitted and it will be considered by the delegates of the convention.
Our next question comes from Reed in Thibodaux, Louisiana. He wants to know why we don't have penalty time in December.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think we have to kind of look at it and understand the history of how and roughly when penalty time came about. So there was a time, long time ago, back, 40 plus years ago, 40 years ago, where we did not have penalty overtime or V time. So we did not have a pay rate when you exceed 10 hours a day or 56 hours a week that you were paid penalty overtime. That changed in the early 80s. And when that changed, we achieved that additional rate of penalty overtime 11 months out of the year. That excluded December. So I think we have to look at it. It's not a thing where December was somehow chopped off or excluded. We did not have it at all at one point in time. Thankfully, we achieved it for 11 months out of the year. I can tell you it has been discussed in a number of rounds of collective bargaining. We obviously have not reached agreement on including December in the time frame where we would be paid penalty overtime. I would suspect that would continue to be a topic of negotiation, but kind of the nature of negotiations is, when you seek to gain something like that, if you're sitting on the other side of the table, and you're the Postal Service, in their mind, they think, well, what could we gain by this? What should we want in return for this? And we just haven't over the years gotten to a place on this particular issue where we were able to reach an agreement that we thought was fair and worth what it would take for us to gain that penalty overtime. So the history of it is in the early 80s, we achieved penalty overtime, but what we achieved was penalty overtime. We went from never having it to having it 11 months out of the year, and excluded December, obviously, because December is also a period of time where, the maximum work hour limitations for overtime desired list carriers, there's an exception during the month of December because of what we see volume-wise with the Postal Service during peak season.
Our next question comes from Demetrius Curry. He's in branch 580 in Indiana. He has multiple e-reassign requests in light blue at this time. He's been a full-time regular employee for 3 years. If he transferred into an office, would he be a PTF or would he be the lowest assigned regular? He just was looking for some clarity.
Yeah, so the answer is it depends. So if you transfer to an office or an installation where there are part-time flexible city carriers, where there are PTFs on the rolls in that installation, you enter that installation through a transfer, a voluntary reassignment. You would go there as a PTF. You would start a new period of seniority, which means you would start at the bottom of that PTF seniority list. If you are currently full-time or PTF and you transfer to a location, an installation where they do not have any PTFs on the rolls, and there's a full-time opportunity there, you will go into that opportunity in a voluntary reassignment, a transfer, as a full-time regular. Let me just give a little bit of context and history here. So for many years, everyone that transferred, regardless of anything, it doesn't matter what your status was, if you were full-time or whatever, when you transferred to another installation, you became a PTF and you started a new period of seniority. That changed a little bit in 2013. So in 2013, when the CCA category through the DOS award was introduced, part-time flexibles were phased out of our craft. We then negotiated an agreement, I think it was in November of 2013, that over the years we negotiated a number of subsequent agreements. That agreement in its current form is actually in our contract, in the national agreement. It's an MOU on full-time regular opportunities, city letter carrier craft. Under the provisions of that MOU, because PTS were being phased out, everyone that transferred went in as full-time. In later rounds of bargaining, we in some ways reintroduced the part-time flexible PTF category into our craft. And that was, we took CCAs that were non-career and a portion of them became PTFs. And that's continued over the last couple of rounds of bargaining. So in the negotiations for the 2019 agreement, there, for a number of different reasons, we bargained several things that resulted in increasing the number of PTFs. So, for example, once CCAs, reach X number of months of relative standing as a CCA, 24 months, they are converted to PTF automatically. So the fact that we had more and more PTFs in our craft, we had to clarify what happens when someone transfers. So if someone is a full-time regular and they transfer somewhere else, pursuant to Article 12 and 41, you have to begin a new period of seniority when you go, if you voluntarily reassign to a new installation. So when you voluntarily reassign, historically, you go there, you go to the bottom of the seniority list, you would become a PTF. Then we had this change in 2013. So what we agreed to do in an MOU that I actually negotiated, it was in March of 2021. The M number in the MRS, if you want to look it up on the website, is M1947. We clarified what would happen in terms of status and that type thing when individuals transferred, now that we had this reintroduction of part-time flexibles, at least in larger numbers, into our craft. And in a nutshell, what that MOU says is if you transfer under that full-time regular opportunities MOU, if there are no PTFs on the rolls, you go in as full-time. If there are PTFs on the rolls in the installation, the gaining installation, the installation to which you are transferring, then you go on the rolls as a PTF and you begin a new period of seniority. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context as to the reason it's the way it is. But in a nutshell, the answer to your question is pretty simple. It just depends on whether there are PTFs on the rolls there or not.
And that was our Ask the Mailbag segment. If you have a question you want to get asked, you can email us at social@nalc.org. Thank you for listening to this episode of You Are the Current Resident podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss an episode. And please share this with our NALC brothers and sisters. You can follow the NALC on social media, on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. You can find links to our accounts in the episode description. And you can follow President Renfroe on Twitter at BrianRenfroe19. If you have any questions to submit or have feedback about this podcast, again, you can please email us at social@nalc.org. May your steward be by your side. May your union have your back. Thanks for listening. Thank your steward. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.